vocabulary. So we're starting a new section called plants. Some basic goals for this section is to learn the basic structure of flowering plants. They're also called angiosperms. Learn how plants reproduce, and you guys already know this. There's bees and stuff like that that transfer pollen, called pollination. Also a little bit of refreshing of photosynthesis, and then some basic plant homeostasis. So follow along with the video, do your vocabulary. Like always, I want you to do definition, sentence, and picture first, and then follow that up with the graphic organizers, and that will be half of your vocabulary grade. You get this section through your table of contents. So we're in plants, which is right here. So everything above that should be completed by now. So when you click on plants, it'll take you to the plant homepage. We're going to do the vocabulary here on the left, and you can see the different work that you're going to be doing in the unit here on the right. So let's start with the first word. The first word is autotroph. That word auto means self, like an autopilot would be like a self-driving plane or a flying plane. And then troph, it has to do with feeding. So an autotroph is a self-feeder, or something that makes its own food. They're also called producers. So you guys know this food pyramid here. Our plants or our producers, well, they are called autotrophs. And then the other things that eat are called heterotrophs. So remember that word hetero means other or opposite. So autotrophs make their own food, which means they do photosynthesis, which means they make glucose. Heterotrophs, on the other hand, have to eat to get that glucose. So good graphic organizer for autotroph would be to just compare autotroph and heterotroph. Autotroph are your plants, they do photosynthesis. Heterotrophs eat the plants to get glucose. Our next word is producer. This is a very similar word to autotroph. Producers are your plants, right? They're the ones that conduct photosynthesis, they make glucose, and hopefully you guys remember photosynthesis. What goes in is water goes into the roots, carbon dioxide goes into the leaf. The plant uses sunlight and it turns that carbon dioxide into sugar called glucose, C6H12O6, and then also oxygen is released. A good graphic organizer here would be the different levels of the food pyramid. So producer, primary consumer, secondary consumer, tertiary consumer. Then next word is root system. You guys know what a root is. A root is the bottom part of a plant, right? Here's some different types of roots. There's some called a tap root, which is kind of more like a triangle type root. And then there's these roots that are also spread out, so like grass right here. So the root system is the part of the plant that is below the ground, and its job is to get water and nutrients into the plant. So those roots here absorb water and nutrients. So a good graphic organizer here is to compare root system with the next word, which is shoot system. So the root system is anything below the ground. What it does is it anchors the plant and it gets water and stuff into the plant. And then the next word is called the shoot system. So root system is below the ground and the shoot system is everything above the ground. So shoot system is everything above the ground in plants. So it's the stem, it's the leaves, it's the flowers, and it's the fruit. Those are the main things that we're concerned about. Obviously, there's a lot of other parts of it, but just know the stem, the leaf, the flower, and the fruit. So anything above the ground is the shoot system, and think of it as it shoots out of the ground. Main thing that it does is it has the chloroplast to do photosynthesis. So the leaves are what actually do photosynthesis. So same graphic organizer, compare root and shoot system. So root system below the ground, shoot system above the ground. Next word is xylem. This is like the vascular system of a plant. So in humans and other animals, we have arteries and veins that move our blood around. Well, plants have that too. It's just not called an artery and a vein. It's called xylem and phloem. So the xylem, the easiest way to remember it is the xylem is going to go up. So it's going to transport the water and those nutrients from the roots up the plant. And remember, for photosynthesis, it needs water. So the water comes from the roots. It's transported up the plant through the xylem. And here you see stuff going up, so you know this is xylem. And then the next word is going to be phloem, and that's what you should do your graphic organizer on, is comparing xylem and phloem. But xylem goes up, phloem goes mostly down, but also goes up. But I just like to keep it simple. Xylem goes up, phloem flows down. So that next word is phloem. So this is also part of that vascular system, and I like to think of it as the part that goes down. So in that plant, the leaves do photosynthesis, they make glucose. Well, the plant needs that glucose to make energy, so that glucose is transported throughout the plant using that phloem system. So it flows downward to the rest of the plant. So xylem goes up, phloem goes down. So same graphic organizer, compare xylem and phloem. Once again, xylem goes up, it's water, and phloem mostly goes down, it's going to be the glucose. So our next word is stomata. The stomata are these little holes in a leaf, and most of the time they're on the bottom of the leaf. And when they're open, carbon dioxide could go in, and that oxygen could come out, and also water will come out. And when they're closed, well, carbon dioxide can't go in. That means that it's not going to do photosynthesis because it's not getting carbon dioxide. So the stomata is that hole in the leaf. It allows the carbon dioxide in, the oxygen out. It opens for photosynthesis, and it's going to close when it's too hot, because if it's open, then water will evaporate out of here. So when it's really, really hot out, it'll close just so that plant doesn't lose all its water. So here's a good microscopic picture of a cabbage leaf. So these are all those stomata, those holes. When they open, it could do photosynthesis, and when they're closed, can't really do photosynthesis. So show what goes in and out. That's a good graphic organizer, which is basically photosynthesis. So carbon dioxide's going in and oxygen's coming out. Next word, chloroplast. You guys should know this one. It's like the third or fourth time we've done it. Chloroplast is that organelle inside of a plant cell that does photosynthesis. So this is where photosynthesis happens. Each one of these little dots in here is one chloroplast. So here's a cell with a whole bunch of chloroplasts in it. Cell with a whole bunch of chloroplasts. So graphic organizers show what goes in and out related to photosynthesis. I like this picture here. So this would be like the top of the leaf. This would be the bottom of the leaf. This would be a stomata, so that hole. So carbon dioxide would go in. That carbon dioxide would diffuse into the chloroplast, or into these cells, and then get into the chloroplast, and that's where photosynthesis will happen. It'll produce oxygen through photosynthesis. That oxygen will come out, right? So through diffusion also. Right, now we're getting into the reproductive parts of a flower. These are for plants called angiosperms. And I know that's one on your vocab list, angiosperm, but angiosperms are flowering plants, which is most of the plants that we have. So the pistil, the pistil, is the female reproductive parts of a flower. And this is kind of what they look like. This whole thing right here is a pistil, and it has a couple different parts: the stigma, the style, the ovaries. And you've probably seen them before. So here's a flower, and then that big part in the middle, this is the pistil. So that would be the stigma right here. This would be something called the style, and then here you would have your ovaries, or ovum, your eggs are in here. So this right here is the female part of the plant, and it's usually located in the center of a flower. And a lot of our flowers actually have male and female parts in the flower. So good graphic organizer would be to draw the different reproductive parts of a flower. So here's that pistil right here with the stigma, the ovary. These little ones right here, those are the male parts. And this is a word you see later called the stamen. All right, but let's break down this pistil a little bit. The stigma, or what I like to say, the sticky stigma right here, is where pollen will land. So what happens is a bee will land on the flower, that pollen will stick to like the bee's feet, the bee will fly to another flower and it will land, and maybe that pollen will stick to the stigma part, this female part. And then that pollen will end up getting down into here, find an egg, and combine with that egg to form a seed. So the stigma, sticky stigma, is where the pollen kind of lands on that female part of the flower. So good graphic organizer, just show how the plant is pollinated. So here's one flower. I got the female part here, I got the male part here, the bee lands on it. Maybe some pollen gets stuck on its legs. That bee will fly to another flower, land on it, and that pollen that was on the legs now sticks to the stigma here, and then that could create a new seed. The other part in here that you need to know, so here's that pistil again, there's the stigma up here, is the ovary or the ovum. Now there are two different things. The ovary is this whole part right here that has these things called ovules in it, but what they do is they create the egg, and the egg is called an ovum. So the pollen will get up here on that stigma, it'll come down in here and find that egg, and that is how it creates that seed. So the part of the female reproductive part, ovary, it's what produces the egg, and then the egg is called an ovum. So graphic organizer, maybe show how a seed is made, or describe how it's made. All right, so the stamen, this is the male part. So here's my flower, and then I got these little things coming off. These are the male parts. So right here is where that pollen is going to be. And remember, that pollen is kind of like plant sperm. So the pollen is going to be on this stamen. And once again, what happens is a bee will land on it. There'll be pollen right here. It'll stick to the bee or the butterfly or something like that. And then that pollinator will move to another flower, and that pollen will get stuck to the female part, that pistil. So a good graphic organizer, compare the male and female reproductive parts. So here's the female part. This is that pistil with the stigma and the ovary. Well, here is that male part, the stamen. And this is where that pollen is going to be right here. There's usually more of these. There's usually one female part and then a whole bunch of male parts on the flower. So the anther is the end of that stamen. So these right here are the anthers. And this is where the pollinator lands on. This is where the pollen's located. And I didn't change it, but this should be another anther right here. Compare the male and female reproductive parts. So same thing. All right, so that's basically the reproductive parts. Now a little bit about homeostasis vocab. So there's some called phototropism. And this word tropism right here is kind of movement. And photo means light. So, phototropism is how plants will move or grow towards light. So you can see a window over here, and that plant is starting to grow that way. Well, plants need sunlight, right, to do photosynthesis, so it's always going to grow towards that light. If you've ever seen a sunflower, they're kind of cool because in the morning they're going to be facing east where the sun comes up, and then it will follow the sun as the sun goes from east to west. And so in the evening, the flower will actually be facing west. So phototropism, good graphic organizer here would be to compare the three types of tropism we're going to talk about. So phototropism, geotropism, and thigmotropism. But phototropism is just growing towards light. All right, next one is gravitropism. It's also called geotropism. It's the same thing. So gravi, this would be gravity. Right? So plants and seeds are going to respond to the gravity around it. So gravitropism is when it either grows toward or away from gravity. And there's two types. There's some called positive gravitropism or geotropism, and then negative geotropism. So the roots do positive geotropism. So if you ever put a seed in the ground, the root will grow out of one side and the shoot will grow out of the other side. And it doesn't really matter which way that seed goes into the ground because of this gravitropism. So the root part is going to grow with the gravity. That means it's going to grow down. So even if that seed is placed with the root up, that root will come out and then it'll start growing down because of gravity. Now the shoot part that comes out of the seed, it doesn't matter if it comes out of the bottom because it will curve and then start growing against gravity, which is a negative gravitropism or geotropism. And you'll see this if I ever put a plant on its side. Instead of growing straight out sideways, it'll start growing up because of that gravity. And if we looked at the roots in here, like we removed the soil, a lot of those roots would be growing down because of gravity. So graphic organizer, same one, compare the three types of tropism we're going over. So phototropism grows towards light. Gravitropism either grows with the gravity or against the gravity, depending if it's a root or a shoot. And then our last word is called thigmotropism. So thigmo means touch. So this is going to move or grow in response to touch. So a couple examples that you might have seen would be like vines. So these little things on vines are called tendrils. Once it touches something nice and firm or solid, it'll start growing around it to give it some support or stability. And that's thigmotropism. It's responding to the touch of that little branch or the fence that it's growing on, something like that. Another example that you guys have all seen would be like a Venus flytrap. So this is normally open, and then some sort of insect or flying thing will land in here, and it will respond to the touch. That's why you could like stick your finger in it and it'll cause that Venus flytrap to close, because it doesn't really know what it's closing on. It just feels touch and it causes it to move or to close. And that would be thigmotropism. Here's another example of thigmotropism. This is called a touch me not. And if you like touch part of its leaf, or you like run your finger down it or a pencil down it or something, it'll fold up to kind of protect itself. So normally they're all nice and fanned out so it could do photosynthesis, but if you touch it, it folds up, and that would be thigmotropism. So another graphic organizer, same one. Compare phototropism, which is movement to light, with geotropism, movement to gravity, and thigmotropism, movement to touch. Now that's all the vocab that you need to do for this one. So make sure you get those graphic organizers done, and you probably have a week or two to get this done. But this will be a grade in the grade book. You guys feel free to stay ahead and move on to the different things that are in the plant section. So you could start doing this reading in the Turgor pressure. You can do these arrangements now. This is stuff we'll do in class, but never hurts to stay ahead. All right, let me know if you have any questions. Otherwise, hope you have a good day.